Welcome to the Get Real About Safety podcast. In our podcast, we discuss the new view of safety, what works and what doesn't work, to break down old paradigms and help you improve safety performance in your organization. Hi, I'm Mike.
And I'm Pam, and we appreciate you listening. Please share and subscribe and tell others about this podcast. You can find us on most podcast platforms and also on YouTube. So good morning, Mike.
Morning, Pam. How are you?
I'm good, and I'm probably doing a little better than you since you have been post-knee surgery, but you are improving, but it has been a journey.
Yep. You know, get the surgery, they said. It won't be that bad, they said. The recovery will be easy, they said. So here I am a few weeks later, but it is getting better. And so I'm sure I'll look back on it. It would have been a good thing.
Yeah, you are getting better. And of course, if you had known all the details, then you might not have got the surgery, and that wouldn't have been a good thing. And you did get a few curveballs along the way. But anyway, things are getting better, and you have persevered, and you haven't missed a lick with work.
No, thank goodness for virtual training.
Thank goodness for that. Well, this morning we wanted to talk about safety training, and safety training has been a huge issue in our lives. And training, not just regulatory training, but, these days we focus a lot less on regulatory and more on the leadership, advanced safety management, human performance concepts. But you and I came up doing a lot of our training in our careers with the OSHA Training Institute with Georgia Tech here in Atlanta, and training OSHA trainers and other regulatory topics. And so we have seen and got to know a lot of trainers out there.
Yep, absolutely.
And it has improved, but the one thing that made me want to do this podcast is this concept and the movement away from check the box training.
Yeah, thank goodness.
Yeah, thank goodness, because back in the day it was check the box training, and fortunately we've still got a lot of folks doing that check the box, and I remember that's how I certainly started in my career, is that, which over quite a few years now, started out with OSHA coming out with a new regulatory requirement, and the one that strikes me, and I know you remember this one well too, is hazard communication standard. Now, when hazard communication standard was applied to construction, and that was one of my first safety training, and got everybody in a room and talked about hazard communication, and everybody, signed their name, they were there, and we checked the box and we were done.
And then you ask somebody out in the field about what they learned in the training, they give you that deer in the headlight look.
Well, not only that, when OSHA asked them about their hazard communication training, and where the material safety data sheets, which is what we called it back then, is they had deer in the headlights. That's all that you got out of that.
And you got a citation.
Yeah, exactly. So it has gotten better. It's still an evolution. And I like to, think hopefully that I've evolved. I think of starting out doing confined space training, and then probably one of the best training that I had the chance to participate in is established as my gold standard, if you will. And that training that happened here in Atlanta was where we did classroom training in the morning, and then we went into the field and the environment, and we did practical exams. And we started out, everyone there had to show that they could use the monitor, that they could calibrate the monitor, they could fill out the permit, they had to set up the ventilation the exhaust ventilation. They had to go back then and retest after setting it up. They had to set up their tripod. They had to don their harnesses. They had to raise and lower somebody out of the space. And all of those things had to be done successfully before we considered, yes, they in fact were trained. Now, it kind of brings to mind, because that's a combination of training and education, which, as you say all the time, are not the same thing.
Yeah, that's correct. And, I think it's really important to distinguish between the two. Those terms are often used interchangeably, but education is providing people with a knowledge base. It's giving them information. And training, though, is showing someone how to do something. And so there is a difference between the two. And in fact, even with OSHA, you notice that they come from the Office of Training and Education, as far as all of the OTI stuff that's done. They even recognize there's a difference between the two. And, sometimes you combine the two, just like what you were talking about there, is you gave educational sessions in the morning to give a basis of knowledge to work from. And then the actual training was in the afternoon, where it was the hands-on component of it. So there is a huge difference. Sometimes you combine them, and sometimes you just do education, sometimes you just do training, but then again, sometimes you combine them as well.
I thought it was interesting. I was teaching a class yesterday. We were talking about OSHA's program standards, safety program standards, and how that's evolved from the original program standards, just talked about safety training. And OSHA deliberately changed that category to safety training and education for that exact purpose. And that makes me think of another thing when you were talking about showing someone how to do something. And it reminds me of a term you use all the time. And well, first of all, you were a paramedic for a lot of years, and I was an RN in and EMT in construction for a lot of years. And we used the see one, do one, teach one process.
Yeah, that's the old surgeon's axiom. And that's how surgeons learn how to do surgery, is that they see a procedure done under the hand of a skilled surgeon. And then they do one under the watchful eye of that surgeon. And then the most important part is that they teach that to someone else. And people actually learn more by doing the teaching than even the other two parts of it. But training really should be based on see one, do one, teach one. And when that's combined with education, that's pretty powerful.
Yes, and that teach one, you can see one, you can do one, but when you have to teach someone that, you prepare better.
Yep.
You think it through, and then you deliver it, and you learn from that process. It's a key part of becoming an effective trainer.
Now, how many folks out there actually do that? I mean, when you think about safety training out there, right, how many companies actually use that process? A lot of times you have a trainer that does the training, but how often do they actually prepare those people that do the training to actually become trainers themselves to train other people?
That's right. And mentor them.
Yeah.
Which is what should be happening.
Yeah.
Also, testing and requirements for testing has changed a lot and still maybe needs some attention. And that's, we have the practical part of testing, which is all good and important and critical, but we also, and some regulations require us to do written or oral testing. And again, whether it's written or oral, that can be a bit of an issue in our industry, where maybe literacy isn't all that good. So we need to be flexible enough to do both of those. But I asked this question quite a bit, where you're doing rigging training, for example, and you have a student who gets a 75 or 80% correct on his written test. So do you just give him a card? Do you have a number? Is that problematic? And I'm not giving legal advice, this is something you should talk with your counsel about, is how you manage that and manage the documentation of that. But my theory has always been that they don't get the card until such time as they can correctly answer all of those questions. Now that is going to mean you're going to need, no, don't just feed them the answer, but go back through the part that perhaps they didn't understand for clarification until you're confident that they understood all the parts that they may have been short on there. Because especially, after an incident or an accident, and all of that stuff becomes discoverable, and you got a guy got a 75 on his rigging test, and he was the rigger for that event that occurred, and that can be a problem for us.
Bad.
Something folks need to think about, and again, talk to your own internal counsel about it.
In the worst case scenario is the fact that sometimes people don't do any measurement of comprehension. And so, there's a huge mistake when we tell somebody something and assume that they understood, because there are so many things that interfere with understanding and retention. And so that's a huge mistake of just telling someone. I hear that a lot of times. Well, they were told. Just because they were told doesn't mean they got it. And if there's not some verification that they got it, that's a huge mistake on our part.
Well, yeah, and the assumption that in the best of training, people walk away with 100% retention is kidding yourself. That we know that doesn't happen, right? So it requires follow-up. So I agree with you completely. I get very frustrated and say, well, he was trained, so he signed his name. Like somehow there's some magic to the fact that the guy signed his name that he took the training. Something else that I hear you talk about quite a bit is that we do safety training, but we don't do job or task training.
That's a huge gap in almost every industry out there. There's a huge tendency to teach people safety rules, to teach regulations, but not teach people how to actually do the job, to do the task itself. You just take example in construction. Oftentimes, people make the assumption because a person is supposed to be a carpenter that they know how to use a skill saw.
Exactly.
And then you find out that person has never used a skill saw in their entire life. They've never had any actual training or demonstration of how to use that skill saw. So people need to be trained in the tasks just as much as they need to be trained in rules.
Or they learned from someone who taught them some bad habits.
Yeah, that happens.
And that happens a lot. So the other issue is training that's just boring.
Yeah.
And we suffer from some of us doing virtual training, and some places where our training is kind of prescribed for us is you have that death by PowerPoint.
Yeah.
And you have a lack of visuals. And how about getting attention?
That's a huge thing. A person doing, whether you're doing education or training, one of the tricks is to get people's attention right up front. Because most people, especially workers, when they come into any kind of training session or an educational session, they're anticipating it's going to be boring. So they've already got that mindset, and that's valid because so oftentimes they have been through boring training. And I've heard workers describe training as like about as exciting as watching paint dry. And so the fact of the matter is that part of it is to get people's attention right up front. There's a lot of ways you can do that. Just as an example, I won't mention any names, but I know of a gentleman who used to do rigging training, and we actually used him for a while at Georgia Tech. And when he would do rigging training at a company, the first thing he would do is pick up a chair and throw it across the room.
And we're not recommending that.
No, by any means. In fact, we couldn't let him do that at Georgia Tech either, by the way. But I'll tell you, it got people's attention. In fact, I remember a class at Georgia Tech where he had a guy come down out of the audience and ask him to lay down on the floor. So the guy lays down on the floor. He walked around talking for 20 minutes, never used the guy for anything, just left the guy laying on the floor. But this guy, you could not help but pay attention to this guy because you never knew what he was going to do next. So getting that attention right up front is absolutely critical. And another thing too is to get that audience engagement right up front.
Mhm.
A trainer really should engage the audience within the first 2 minutes. Whether that be through introductions or whether
Mhm.
that be asking direct questions, but to get them involved in the first 2 minutes. When a trainer drones on for 15, 20 minutes, you can already see the eyes starting to glaze over out there.
Yeah.
And then one other part about that is making sure that we let people know what's in it for them. Most people don't go to training or educational sessions just because they want to get training or education. And failure to let people know, the old acronym WIIFM, what's in it for me? By letting people know and discuss what's in it for them will help to maintain that attention a whole lot more. That's important.
And so getting away from the death by PowerPoint is to not overuse it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a good training tool, but to, use exercises, brainstorming sessions, group breakout sessions, to do things like that to have that engagement, to keep people engaged. Something I have been guilty of, and in fact, I did a little post on LinkedIn about this the other day, is that seems like every time I went to LinkedIn, all I see is pictures of workers screwing up.
Yeah.
And
It's disturbing.
it's disturbing. And we do the same thing in training, is that we show pictures and we use videos of workers screwing up. I actually had a Spanish speaking worker say to me one time in training, goes, "How come I keep seeing pictures of Spanish people screwing up?" And I thought, wow. So it's an effort on my part to focus away from that and to show people how to, not how not to.
Or at least balance that. I mean, it's okay to show,
it.
here's how you don't do it and here's how you do it.
Right.
Those comparisons are kind of valuable, but I see that too. And, one of the worst things, I've seen that on LinkedIn too, where somebody's kind of safety professionals actually making fun of the people who are involved in unsafe acts,
Yes.
as if they are so superior
Right.
to the people out doing the acts without, we know from human performance that people do what they do because of the context of the work itself.
Exactly.
And so that truly, from a safety professional standpoint, is unprofessional and demeaning to the workers. That's disturbing. I hate to see that out there.
Well, it ties in with that "can't fix stupid" comment that we hear
Yeah.
so much. And we love the comedian. He's funny as all get out, Ron White, but we as safety professionals should not be saying that "can't fix stupid." That takes us back to the old view, not the new view of safety.
Yeah, and it illustrates a complete ignorance of human factors and
Right.
Human performance.
And another thing, when I was talking, offline with you about safety training that you mentioned was, and this is a bigger issue in safety overall, is not including the recovery piece.
Yeah.
Right. So what if things fail? So what if things fail? What if things change? So, fall protection should include that. What if you fall? Right. Same thing with trenching, with confined space. What if things change? That's a big issue, is how do you handle change? And I think about that. You do an awful lot of NFPA Lotto kind of training. And do we cover that adequately in training? Is what should someone do when now things are not according to the plan?
Yeah, that really speaks to a couple of things. One is it speaks to the human performance concept of work as imagined versus work as practiced. The straight line versus the crooked blue line is that work hardly ever goes as it's planned.
That's right.
And so we don't do enough talking with people about when things don't go as planned. or if the plan changes, what should they do?
Right.
And the other part, what you're talking about, is the organizational resilience part of we do put way too many eggs in the prevention basket, but sometimes those preventative efforts certainly fail.
That's right.
And we really don't put enough thought and emphasis on what do you do when those preventative efforts fail? What's the recovery side? And that should be balanced.
Or just planning for failure.
Yeah.
We don't plan for failure.
Right. We just assume people are tied off and
Everything's great.
You got all the PPE on and everything's going to be great and wonderful. And we don't plan for the fact that sometimes things fail. Machines fail sometimes.
Another thing we see a lot, and again, this has been our career for decades, but we're not perfect and we make mistakes.
Right.
But there are folks out there doing things like regulatory training that don't know their topic. They do not know the topic. They don't have competency in the topic. And, I like to stay in your doggone lane here, right?
It's kind of like in our consulting practice, we try to very much stick to the things that we know,
right?
And not purport to do things that we don't know. For example, I'm not an industrial hygienist, and I'll be the very first one to say I am not an industrial hygienist. And we get calls for that sometimes.
Yes, we do.
So, our approach is to refer them to a professional industrial hygienist and not try to go out there and pretend that we are that just for the sake of making money.
That's right. Or, there are things where we have some expertise in the subject matter, but we don't have expertise in doing the training. And I've benefited from co-training with you so many times where instead of just hopping out there and doing it, I'm working with you or working with someone else until I feel comfortable and competent to do that.
Sure.
training.
And vice versa. Yeah.
So trainers need to not only be subject matter experts in the subject themselves, but also in the industry that they're serving. Folks who come from an industrial safety background now going to do training for people in wood frame and residential, and all the material that they're going to use is from an industrial setting, and that's just not going to work. You've got to actually know the company and how they do their work.
I mean, it's got to be pertinent. It's got to be relevant. Relevancy is a huge part of training.
It is. And then the other thing is that, and you and I know some folks that are so doggone smart in their subject matter, they're subject matter experts in certain things, but darn, they can't train.
There are some folks who are just not cut out to be trainers or educators.
Right.
Very smart people, but they simply don't have the ability to deliver. Right. And it really kind of speaks a lot to organizations selecting trainers and making sure those trainers are qualified and that they have the skills to deliver.
Yeah, that's a huge issue, and especially for large companies where you're going to have a number of trainers. Not only is it up to the company to evaluate the competency of those trainers, but to ensure consistent messaging by all of those trainers and to ensure consistent delivery of materials, that we don't have conflicts where I took this class, a year ago and Jim said this, and now you're saying that. And there has to be that. We can't lose credibility out there with the workforce. So that's important.
Everybody can't be an expert in everything.
No.
And so it may be that people have very strong technical knowledge and delivery skills in one particular area, but not in another. And it's okay to bring in other trainers. It's okay to bring in outside people or vendors, people who can deliver a lot deeper information. And that's okay to do that.
You were just dealing with us this week with a client of ours that they finally realized that they did not have the internal capability to effectively deliver the training, and they went to using an outside vendor for that. Now, on the issue of external trainers, I've been the one that deals with this question all the time in this company for years now, is that someone calls and says, can you do XYZ training? And we go, well, yes, we do. We do provide that. And the first thing we want to know is what's the price, right? And
that's a red flag.
So they're not asking about, are you good at it, or what's your background in it, or your qualifications to do that kind of training. They just want to know the price. In fact, I remember this a few years back. I had someone call and wanted a 30-hour class, and it's like, well, yeah, we can do that. And they said, well, how long is it going to last? It's like, well, a 10 hours, 10 hours. And they're like, oh, and then asked for the price. I gave them a price, and they're like, well, I got to tell you, when we did this last time, the guy did it in 2 hours, and he charged, pennies on the dollar for what you're saying here. And that probably wasn't right, was it? And I said, no, it's not right. It's not right at all. And he said, okay, well, I'll call you back. Well, I never heard from him again. So, and I know, and the American people know how that went. They went back to their 2-hour guy.
It kind of gets back to that check the box training. That's one of the red flags of check the box. When people are more concerned about the price than they are the quality of the training, then that's a red flag. They're just looking to have somebody's signature on a piece of paper that if they get inspected by OSHA, or they have an accident, they've got some documentation to show the insurance company. And so they just want to check the box at the cheapest price. And frankly, from our company standpoint, we're just not interested in clients that want to do that.
Well, you've been
in fact, we turned down that business.
Yeah, you've been verbal about that, and I've adopted the same thing. You just ask the question, look, if you're just price shopping, because you know what, we're not going to be the cheapest.
Yep.
So call somebody else. Another thing, and can't fully answer this issue, but it is important to do records retention.
Oh, yes.
And we find a lot of times where companies maybe be making the assumption that their safety people are retaining the records or whatever. It's up to the company to make sure that they have policies and processes for records retention, and so what do you keep? Now, this varies. When it comes to regulatory training, this varies by the regulations. We can't say one size fits all, but definitely you always want to keep the content of the training or the materials that were used in the training, testing information, if assuming you have testing, trainer's signature, their name, perfect world, their qualifications, the dates of the trainings, the employees' names, and then how long to keep it. That varies by regulations. We can't answer that across the board, but minimum for anything is always the length of employment for that worker. That's the minimum of that. So you got to check your regulations. And it's also another one of those things that safety needs to be talking to your counsel about, that documentation piece.
It kind of gets back from a legal standpoint too, and this is not legal advice, but the old axiom that if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. So organizations that don't keep training records could easily be looked at as they just didn't do it.
And it's also, the company needs to understand that it's their responsibility to keep those records.
Yeah.
It's not the responsibility of outside trainers. I mean, we do our best to keep records, but at the end of the day, it's their company and it's their training. And then
we've seen that. I know I don't do as much of the regulatory stuff at Georgia Tech anymore that you and Philip do, but over the years I've seen that a lot, where an OSHA trainer would leave a company.
Right.
And they were keeping the records personally rather than keep them with the company. And then when they got audited, OSHA doesn't want to hear that trainer worked here and he left 5 years ago, or she left 5 years ago, and they got the training records. It's incumbent on that employer to keep those records.
Well, but it goes both directions.
Yeah.
Because it also is incumbent upon now when it comes to 10 and 30-hour training, OSHA can revoke the trainer status for a trainer if they let the company keep the records and they didn't keep records.
Yeah.
So it
So
falls
it needs
on-
to go both ways.
it needs to go both directions for sure. And that's the world Philip is living in a lot these days, isn't it? Another thing that a lot of folks aren't aware of in safety, which is kind of sad when you think about it, is that there are ANSI standards for safety and health training, safety, health, and environmental training. And if we are, as a company, trying to live in the best practice world, not the minimum requirements, then we are obviously going to follow OSHA requirements for training, but we're also going to be aware of and incorporate some of those ANSI standard requirements. There's also there's a new ANSI standard coming out specifically on the online delivery of training, which is another conversation. But so things that are in there is needs assessments, doing needs assessments, and developing learning objectives, and evaluations. Let's talk about evaluations for just a minute. In Pam's perfect world, you would always do written evaluations, and frankly, we don't always do that with some types of training. But how important are those evaluations for the trainer?
People only get better through feedback. And I've known trainers who don't want that feedback. They avoid that feedback. But the quality of the trainer is not in the eyes of the trainer. It's in the eyes of the audience.
Mm-hmm.
And so the best evaluation of how well the trainer is training and how well the training is delivered is in the eyes of the people, the trainees. And so those evaluations are direct, instant feedback of what was good and what needs to be fixed. And if a trainer utilizes that for continuous improvement, you only get better and better and better. But, I know of one situation, we know of an individual who made a comment a while back that they don't want the feedback. They do not care what the audience thinks.
Yeah.
That's a serious mistake. And to me, that's a trainer that should not be training.
Yeah, that you got to have that feedback, and obviously an informal evaluation process is a good thing, but something I see you do all the time, I try to emulate it because I think it's a good practice, is at a minimum, asking people at the end of the training, what did you learn today? Give me something you got out of this today. If you got a bunch of folks can't give you anything, that's not looking good. But it also gives you an idea of what stuck in their head, what kind of stood out from that training.
Yeah, doing takeaways is a good informal way of kind of doing a little mini evaluation of, what did they actually get out of the training.
And so that falls into the ANSI standard for EHS training that talks about that 4-level evaluation process. And the first one is reaction, is after the training, ask for feedback. What'd you learn? How did it go? And then testing, which we already kind of touched on. But now here's the critical one that gets missed so much, and that's called the behavior section. And that's following the training, right? Observing employees to see if it's been integrated. You want to talk about that? Follow up?
Yeah, the two components that are really important in training is retention and transference. And retention is the amount of information that people actually retain. But that's only a part of it. Transference is the most important. And what transference is the trainee exhibiting the behaviors and the skills that they learned through the training based on the retention. And so transference has to be reinforced. In other words, supervisors pretty much have a duty, once somebody goes through training, to watch them work and make sure they're working and that the behaviors are congruent with what they learned in the training. And then when they are, to reinforce those behaviors, to continue more of those behaviors. And if they're not, to provide some constructive coaching. But failure to assure transference undermines retention very shortly over time.
Well, and not just in the short term, but also the long term, because of the drift. right?
Yeah.
Because
that's
we know
right.
you're going to drift. Everybody kind of gets plumbed up right after that training, but then what's happened 6 months down the road to that? And have we drifted from some of those principles?
I mean, you even see that in new hire safety orientations as people, they go and learn all of the company rules and the way you do things and the procedures, and then they go out and do the right thing. Nobody says anything. And then they do the right thing and nobody says anything. And after a while, you start getting not only knowledge drift, but you get behavioral drift as well. And I mean, it's huge. Those behaviors have to be reinforced.
That reminds me of another thing that someone said. You talk about safety orientations is I heard a worker say after training one time is that, he made some comment about, so that's because, they go to new hire safety training for every new job and often different general contractors or whatever. And he said, you go to the new hire orientation and that's what safety department tells you in the new hire orientation. And then you walk out of there and you walk out the job and you just take a good look around and see what is it we really do?
Yeah.
Because a great deal of the time they don't match up.
Or a supervisor asks them to do something that's counter to what they were trying to do.
And I had that happen in a safety training session one time where the supervisor actually said, met them at the door as they were coming out, and he goes, okay, you heard all that. Now let's go out and you're going to do what I say we're going to do, and we're going to get the job done. He just completely deflated all of that.
There goes both retention and transference.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're going to have to do a couple of follow-up safety training things. Some of the things I want to do, one is on the whole language issue, because I'm not even going to open that can of worms, because that's a huge issue is multi-language and cultural training. So I'm going to bring in a subject matter expert on that. And the other one is technology and training. And I'm not an expert in that either. So I want to bring some folks in. And we probably need to bring Philip in just because we have had such a wonderful set of laughs for years now about Philip's training experiences. Would you not agree?
Oh, yeah.
And we have a whole, folder on the server about places Philip has had to do training, like in the job trailer that had no power and you got a generator running at the time, and 5-gallon buckets for seats and no air conditioning in the shop, and it goes on and on and on. So
that conjures up a specific memory where I was doing some training. I'm in some 5-star hotel somewhere, and he texted me a picture of where he's training. It was exactly what you're talking about.
I know. So we may have to do a follow-up on that one as well. But anyway, that's the talk for today. A little bit on safety training. It's a big topic, and it's a continuous improvement topic. We always have to strive to get better, and we're all doing that as well. Thanks for joining me here this morning.
Thanks, folks. See you later.
Take care.